Interim President of the Central Bank advises St. Martin to comply with CFATF or risk being Black President of the University of St. Martin to host climate change seminar. But first up, Prime Minister of St. Martin meets with French counterparts to discuss COVID-19. Those are the headlines for Tuesday, March the 3rd, 2020. This is SXM Daily News. I'm Valerie Van Putten. Now for the details. Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs meets with the prefect to discuss COVID-19 developments. In a very informative meeting that was held on Monday, March 2nd, 2020, Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs, along with senior staff of the Dutch side government, met with their French counterparts and the prefect Sylvie Fauchère to discuss the developments surrounding the COVID-19 virus and its presence on the Twin Island nation. St. Martin currently has zero, absolutely no suspected nor confirmed cases of COVID-19. A situation like this shows how important it is to have good cooperation between the two sides of the island. Our island is an important hub for the region with a great amount of international traffic. We have an open border and therefore this issue is a joint issue, which we are addressing in cooperation. The Prime Minister elaborates.
We have been cooperating, I believe, on a very good level, at all levels, in regards to the coronavirus threat to our island. As the prefect mentioned, we are one island. We know the saying, the gale does not stop at the border. We know the mosquito does not stop at the border. And obviously the coronavirus will also not stop at the border. It has not stopped the borders of the world. We know the risk we have as a hub country getting passengers from all over. As a result of this confirmed cases that are now on the French side, though we acknowledge that they have also passed through the Dutch side. We would like to reiterate that they were asymptomatic, so no symptoms at the time. This has been confirmed by Dr. Blies, that they remain without symptoms, so the threat is then very low that any transmission would have occurred. We have done tracing to assure our public that we are up to par. We have increased our screening protocols at the ports of entry, especially for persons coming from areas that have been identified as risky areas. So those persons will have to take extra steps in order to be able to travel to St. Martin. As a hub, we also have persons that travel to other countries, and if those countries have very strict entry protocols, then we are ending up stuck with those transit passengers. So especially with the festivals coming up, we will continue to our health organizations, our police and border control will continue to collaborate on a daily basis. The prefect and I will be in constant contact as well for any changes. We know our capacities on both sides are limited, but the good thing about our affiliations with Europe is that assistance is but a phone call away. And as Prime Minister of St. Martin and head of the EOC Center, the Emergency Operations Center, we have already sent out requests for extra materials, for possibility for mobile units if necessary, should our capacity become insoluble. And we have upped our controls and protocols within schools, within frontliners, as we've called them now, people with first-hand contact, and at our airports. So all are concerned, all are doing what we can, and we are promoting prevention. So proper hygiene, maintaining proper etiquette for hand washing, coughing and sneezing, which we know are the two main ways that the virus is transmitted and spread. So we are doing our best to ensure that minimal chances for more persons to enter our shores with the virus, but once we have gone through our protocols, we see that once identified, the containment is pretty quick, and we're very happy that our collaboration with the French side has been so good thus far, and we will continue to meet in the big group at least once per week, but daily our counterparts will be in contact with each other.
For more information, you can call the following emergency numbers of the Collective Prevention Service: 520-4523, 520-1348, or 520-5283. You can also listen to the government radio station 107.9 FM for official information, statements, and news updates, or visit the government website and Facebook page, Government of St. Martin. And in more news, the board of the University of St. Martin held a press conference on Tuesday morning, March the 3rd, 2020, on the arrival of researchers to St. Martin on the topic of islands under threat, climate change vulnerability. Project coordinator and former president of the University of St. Martin, Dr. Francio Guadalupe, who currently is a professor at the University of Amsterdam, spoke about how this proposal came about.
For a very long time, although we're part of the kingdom, the Dutch Research Council only funded researches that would actually be based on universities in the Netherlands proper. So only in the Netherlands those universities could apply for funding for large-scale researches. When I was president of this institution, I had also funding from the Dutch Research Council, and that was why you had researchers coming down from the Netherlands. But it was based on the fact that I had a position also at the University of Amsterdam. So I could apply via the University of Amsterdam and then get funding whilst I was president here. And that meant that some of those researchers would come down here and do some research. That has changed because now the Dutch Research Council for the very first time has said, we will let universities on the islands also compete with universities in the Netherlands for funding. That was the first time they did it. And it was done in two steps. One step was a pre-proposal, so everyone across the board from whichever university could apply for funding, and they also opened it up for international universities. So universities from Canada, the US, the wider Caribbean, Asia, if they wanted to, they could apply. They received a large amount of various research proposals, and it turned out that they chose 7 of those research proposals. 4 in the social sciences and 3 in the natural sciences. Of those 4 in the social sciences, my proposal and the proposal of Corien Hofman, who's my colleague at the Royal Academy, our proposals were honored. We've decided to merge proposals. I'll tell you something a bit about my proposal, then she'll tell you something about her proposal and the reasons why we decided to merge it, and how we plan to go about further building this out into a proposal that will then be able to compete for the larger grant, and the larger grant will be a grant of 3 million or 3.5 million euros. So first the proposal that was honored, my proposal, and then Corien's proposal, but it's really now one proposal, but I'll just give you the rundown of how the 2 proposals worked. The first proposal was called Art, Anthropology and Architecture. And it was based upon recognizing that St. Martin is facing climate change, facing hurricanes of magnitudes that it didn't have before. Irma was the first of these hurricanes, and according to the prognosis of the natural sciences, the Caribbean will be hit with heavier hurricanes in the future. It also means that the Caribbean will be facing sea level rises, so which means many of the countries will have to adapt how they live, because many places will become uninhabitable if we do not do anything quickly to mitigate climate change. So this proposal, Art, Anthropology and Architecture, said we have to look at the resiliency of people on the Windward Islands, people from St. Martin, Saba and Statia. And there are 3 types of resiliences. So we're not looking at people, when I wrote it, saying that the people don't know what they're doing. I believe people have knowledge on these islands. They know how to build houses. That's the material resilience. So in knowing how to build houses, the question was, how do you get architecture researchers from Delft and other universities to come down, build with the people in a set of neighborhoods, find out how they build, and then respectfully be able to give advice of how they can improve those buildings to be able to handle the hurricanes and the earthquakes that are coming along with those hurricanes. So that's the material resilience. The second part of it, because you can't only do a technical fix, you also have to look at the social infrastructure. How are the neighborhoods and the districts on St. Martin, Saba, and Statia organized? Who are the formal and informal leaders? When there is an event or a catastrophe or disaster, who do you call in? What's the network? How do you strengthen the social network of those neighborhoods so that they can better deal with the changes that are coming?
And Professor of Caribbean Archaeology, Corinne Hoffman, explained the second part of the research. Professor Hoffman has been working 33 years in the Caribbean, from St. Vincent to the Dominican Republic.
I am an archaeologist specialized in the Caribbean, and particularly a special focus on the Dutch Caribbean, although that my research, as you said, focuses between Aruba and Cuba since 33 years. So we have been doing a lot of research indeed on Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, but also on Dominican Republic, Antigua, St. Lucia, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saba, Statia. Our dissertation, in fact, in 1993 was on the archaeology of Saba. So we have a long history of the archaeology of the Caribbean, and specifically interested in the deep history, so the first settlers. And one should not forget that the islands were settled around 4,000 years ago. And what we are seeing in the archaeological record is already people dealing with climate change. And this is one of the reasons that I became interested in the whole issue of climate change in the past, but also in the present. So my proposal is called Islanders Under Threat, co-production of sustainable solutions for climate change challenges in the Dutch Caribbean. So the proposal focuses on all 6 islands, and as you said, we are focusing on the ABC Islands, more on the threat of coastal erosion, sea level rise, but we should not forget that also these islands were threatened by tsunamis already 4,000 years ago. And so in that sense, these first settlers 4,000 years ago had already to deal with these extreme wave events. On the Leeward Islands here, we will focus indeed also on coastal erosion, because we are dealing with the same problem, but of course also with hurricanes. So what we aim to do is to focus on architecture, and that is where immediately we were finding each other. We are focusing on water management, because in fact house building cannot be seen without dealing with water, sweet water. And in the third instance, with food security. So how can we re-establish traditional agriculture, traditional foodways, especially after big events like hurricanes? So what we are aiming to do is to not only work with researchers, but also with GOs, NGOs, and grassroots organizations from the beginning of the project. And that is why we are doing also these outreach seminars here, just to be able to talk with everybody in establishing and developing this proposal, which is due mid-April. So at the end, to synthesize, we want to merge like scientific, technical, and traditional knowledge to address the issue of climate change resilience.
There will be a public outreach seminar on Wednesday, March the 4th from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. The public is invited. And still to come, police on St. Martin requesting information from the public on burn victim. We'll have the details of that story and more when SXM Daily News returns.
GEBE has been faithfully serving the communities of St. Martin, powering your home and our economy. Come rain or shine, our qualified team of professionals are working hard 24 hours a day to provide you and your family with safe, reliable electricity and water. We use the latest technologies and test our products daily to maintain the highest international standards. Our friendly staff is always there to assist you, whether in person, over the phone, or online. We are committed to constantly improving our products and services, making them more efficient, effective, and environmentally friendly to serve you better today and our next generation of clients tomorrow. GEBE, powering a brighter future.
Our friend Megawati is here with tips to save you energy. 1. Turn your airco temperature up. 2. Use a ceiling fan instead. 3. Buy energy-saving products. Save some green with NVGEBE.
On Saturday afternoon, February the 29th, around 2:30 p.m., the Central Dispatch received several calls concerning a woman in Dutch Quarter that had been severely burnt. The police and ambulance personnel encountered the victim and the initials JJW on the Quilter Drive with burn wounds over 70% of her body and complaining of pain. While being treated on the scene by the emergency personnel, police patrol tried to ascertain what took place, but the victim could not give an account of what happened to her. The victim was later rushed to the St. Martin Medical Center by ambulance personnel for further treatment. JJW, who is in critical condition, was flown to Colombia on Sunday morning. The investigation is currently still ongoing. Interim President of the Central Bank for Curaçao and St. Martin, CBCS, Jose Jardim, is urging St. Martin to do its utmost to comply with the Financial Action Task Force regulations and avoid being blacklisted for non-compliance. The Central Committee meeting on Parliament, which was held on March 2, 2020, in the General Assembly Chamber of the House of Parliament in Phillipsburg, was a presentation on economic development by the Central Bank of Curaçao and St. Martin. Interim President of CBCS is Jose Jardim.
Martin has been growing since its autonomy, contrary to Curaçao that has been contracting, and then the contraction is much more accentuated. It's also relevant to look at the public budget, so the government's budget. What you see in this graph, we have presented the figures from 2010 up to 2019, and it's remarkable the fact that compliance to the fiscal rules, especially the one determining that the budget should be in balance, de gewone dienst, sluitende gewone dienst, so the current account in balance, has been much more the exception than the rule. Especially for the last 3 years, both islands forming the monetary union have shown budget deficits. The situation in St. Martin is, of course, particularly influenced by Hurricane Irma, and this has affected the public finances of St. Martin. When you look at the figures of Curaçao, then you also observe that for the last 3 years, it has been recording deficits, and that's related mainly to the situation in Venezuela and its impact on the economy of Curaçao. We will continue with some monetary developments. In this chart, we would like to show that if you look back at the year 2000, and if you compare the pattern of relationship with abroad, so with other business partners of the two islands, then you will see that while at the beginning of this new millennium, there was more or less a balance between exports and imports formed by the two islands. What you observe is that the gap between exports and imports has been widening over the time. Especially the last 3 years, you see the influence once again in St. Martin of Hurricane Irma, which has affected mainly the exports, but you also observe the impact of the situation in Venezuela, which has also hurt the exports in Curaçao. If you look at St. Martin, it's of course actually its main industry is tourism, so tourism was severely affected by Hurricane Irma. In the case of Curaçao, you have several factors which are related actually to the refinery, which has stopped more or less operations 2 years ago, but also its influence on tourism from Venezuela, and also its impact, for instance, on the airline industry that has hit the economy of Curacao as well. In this chart, what we can see is actually how our balance of payments has evolved over time. And what you see is that from a more or less balanced situation beginning this new millennium, we have been, we can observe that the deficit on the balance of payments has been widening, and that it ranges more or less between 15 and 20% for the last years. That's actually also the reason why we have introduced some changes in our monetary policy that we will be covering in a while. This graph once again presents the figures of the exports and imports. It only expresses these as percentages of the GDP for everyone to get a better impression about the weight of exports and imports in the monetary union. We are very open economies, mainly due also to our small sizes and the lack of natural resources, and that also explains the high levels of exports and imports.
Mr. Jardim also said that it is important to emphasize that many observations are being made about the decline of the import coverage in the last couple of years. But we should recognize that the high level for the last couple of months is mostly an exception.
Shown in this chart is actually that our international reserves, which ranged in the past up to more or less 500 million guilders, has grown in the second half of the years 2000 up to a level of about 2.5 billion. So the higher levels, the peaks range about 2.5 billion guilders, and the lower levels, which are more or less constant, those correspond with the value of 500 million of guilders of international reserves. If we were to have the timeline represented here, then we could relate it immediately, for instance, to the debt relief program. The debt relief led to a substantial inflow of international reserves, which explains most of the growth of our international reserves. That's why it's also very important for us to look at the following chart, in which we present the import coverage, which is the number of months that we could finance our imports if the economies were to come to a complete standstill. And what we see is that it has been ranging in the last 10 to 12 years between 3 and 5 months. It is especially important for us to emphasize that many observations are being made, for instance, about the decline of the import coverage in the last couple of years. But what we should recognize is that the high level corresponding to 5 months of import coverage is mostly an exception. If we look at the timeline and we look at the time span up to 2008, then you can observe that our import coverage was much lower than it is currently, and this is once again explained by the debt relief program, which led to a major inflow of international reserves. One item that we also wanted to present is the following one, because we have reviewed our way of calculating the import coverage. In the darker line is the one representing the new calculation methodology, and the lighter one, the light gray one, represents the old definition. And then you could see that even in case we use the new definition, that would even imply that the import coverage has been even lower in the past than using the former definition. So even if we compare the current figures with the old figures, we should take into account that if we are to harmonize the methodology, that would imply that the differential is much larger, because the import coverage in the past was about 2 months instead of a higher level. This is particularly important because whenever you have such a strong inflow of international reserves, that means that, and we will be showing that in our next slide, this leads to liquidity coming into the economies, into the monetary union, and which may cause excess liquidity within the monetary union. What we have observed is that this has also fueled actually credit extension within the monetary union. This does not apply to St. Martin. It especially applies to Curacao. St. Martin has been recording negative growth of credit extension, while Curacao has been growing, extending the credit extension. This is the one excess liquidity that we were mentioning. What you see is that once again you can relate it to the debt relief program. The debt relief program started back in 2009. There was an inflow of international reserves at the end of 2008 when the Netherlands made the funds initially available, when they started with the process. And then you see a clear increase of the international reserves position of the monetary union. And this excess liquidity may cause also granting more credit than is possible. And why is this being mentioned? Because if we look back at the figures which were presented in the first chart, then you would see that the economies of the union have not really been growing. If you have an economy of St. Martin growing an average of 1% and the one of Curacao growing 0.1%, that means that you should not expect to have a growth of credit extension, but that's still the case.
Now turning to our weather forecast. A weak Atlantic high-pressure system will continue to support a stable atmosphere across the local area. Consequently, winds will be light to moderate with no significant precipitation during this forecast period. Moderate seas are expected with waves peaking up to 7 feet. Small craft operators and sea bathers should exercise caution. Now let's turn to your 3-day forecast. Still to come, financial institutions want international expert at the helm of central bank. We'll have the details of that story and more when SXM Daily News returns.
Make use of WIB mobile banking with easy access and direct usage of face recognition, PIN code, or fingerprint. Download WIB mobile banking app and make your transaction from anywhere at any time. For more information, visit wib-bank.net/quick-login.
And still in Willemstad, financial institutions want an international expert at the helm at the central bank. It's the opinion of Curaçao International Financial Services Association, CIFA, the Curaçao International Financial Center, CIFC, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Business Association, VBC. The profile of the one or two candidates for the management of the central bank must have at least the following qualifications: expert with extensive international experience as a supervisor in the financial sector and or as part of international institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, DNB, and or FATF. This experience and having a network with incomparable institutions is not only important as relevant expertise and experience, but it is also essential to restore international confidence in the central bank and to receive support in the process of change. The candidates should also have experience in managing change processes and managing reorganizations, restructurings within the traditionally financial-oriented institutions, and being able to transform those proven into transparent and modern organizations. They should take the international perspective into account with the primary objective of restoring the segregation between supervision, policy, and implementation at CBCS. I am Valerie Van Putten. Just a reminder that this and other programs are available online. Simply log on to stmartinmediacenter.com for viewing. And on behalf of the SXM Daily News team, we thank you for watching and plan on meeting you back here again tomorrow.